The victims of the worst disasters in fast food history counted their age in months, not years.
7 cases of E. coli have been reported so far this year.
We're not talking about an upset stomach that a Tums could fix. We're talking about a 6-year-old girl eating her favorite burger. Only this time, she found herself at the center of the worst disease outbreak in U.S. fast food history.
Health officials say people infected with the E. coli bacteria may be unknowingly infecting others.
The industry wants children like her to be nothing more than a statistic. You don't know this girl, but by the end of this video, you will. The industry sells about 140 million burgers every day, just in the US. That's 140 million potential disease outbreaks just waiting to happen. The 3 outbreaks in this video went from potential to reality.
After one of the biggest outbreaks of hepatitis A in United States history,
we'll show you the horrific events behind these unlikely incidents, and you'll see that they weren't really that unlikely. Thousands of people exposed, hundreds hospitalized, and many left with a lifetime of illness, and for some, even worse. By the end, you'll be disgusted by how little was done to stop it all from happening. Foodborne illnesses are a chronic problem in the U.S. 128,000 people end up in the hospital, and about 3,000 die from these diseases every year. Say you buy yourself a burger. You're led to believe it's fresh, but it's already been through 5 artificial stages. It's produced, processed, packed, stored, and distributed to fast food brands. It's an over-processed disgrace to good food, but at least it's safe to eat, right?
The CDC says they are investigating an E. coli outbreak that has sickened at least 37 people in 4 states, including Pennsylvania.
The CDC, USDA, and FDA are supposed to ensure its safety. Food is actually one of America's most heavily regulated industries, but every year, these 3 government bodies fail you. The meat comes from one place, the lettuce from another, and the pickles from a 3rd location. That's all slapped together, which is then sold to you. There's room for contamination at each of the 5 stages of the supply chain. These weaknesses might feel small at first, but take your single burger and apply it to the entire U.S. fast food industry. You'll see how fast food can ruin lives and turn a promising future into a living nightmare. Any good food brand, no matter how trusted or beloved, will gladly exploit your faith in them to save a few bucks, even if those savings come at the expense of your health. One of those beloved brands is Chipotle. Creators flood TikTok with hacks to get more of their food. They buy into the brand's motto, food with integrity. Chris Collins, a 30-something web developer in Portland, also bought into what the brand was selling.
Chipotle was one of the few places we actually would go to with any consistency because of their brand based on food integrity.
He and his wife Kelly bought local, organic produce and ate ethically raised animals. They ate with integrity. So a meal at Chipotle should have been a perfect fit for them, right? But on October 23, 2015, integrity was in short supply. Chris ate his usual chicken bowl with 21 fresh, healthy ingredients. It was a delicious Friday evening meal, setting him up for a great weekend. But it never came. The next night, Chris's body started to fall apart. He developed a body ache and severe stomach problems. He loved working out and hiking, but on October 24th, he couldn't even move without feeling severe pain. Just like any of us would, he assumed he had the flu. But every time he ate or drank something, his stomach would bloat and he would be in agony. Chris didn't know what was happening to his body, and Kelly couldn't help. Neither of them knew how much worse it was going to get. A couple of days later, Chris's stomach began giving out on him completely. He went to the bathroom nearly 20 times in 12 hours. This was not the flu. This was something way more dangerous. Kelly took her husband to an urgent care clinic nearby. Seeing his condition, he was immediately sent to the emergency room. Chris was terrified. He had no answers. His body was on fire, and every scary disease he could think of was running through his mind on a loop. Through all of this, Chris didn't even consider that Chipotle was responsible. They served food with integrity, and he trusted them. On Halloween, a day after visiting the ER, his doctor called and told him he had Shiga toxin-producing E. coli 26. The illness was traced back to one of the 21 fresh ingredients in his chicken bowl. The toxin was attacking his kidneys and intestines.
New tonight, the outbreak of E. coli linked to Chipotle has now reached California. 2 new cases were reported in Turlock today.
Chris's world shattered around him. How could he have known that one of his favorite meals would cause all of this? Kelly was by his side, but she would be powerless if his kidneys failed. This was a very real possibility with this strain of E. coli. His doctors told him intensive treatment, even dialysis was on the table if the organ didn't fail completely. Take a second to imagine what this must have been like. You eat a meal you've had on the regular before, but this time it tears through your insides, and the person you love can only watch. The only power you have is to pray that your kidneys hold up. Fortunately for Chris, they did. It took another 5 days for his terrible pain to pass and another 6 weeks to recover, but that recovery was incomplete. Psychologically, he was traumatized. He stopped eating out and considered going vegetarian. He refused to eat anything with fresh vegetables unless it had been washed and cooked at home.
And so it's hard for me to believe that I can go back to a place like Chipotle even if they make strides to improve it, because the reality is that there was waste in the food that I ate.
Chris was terrified by the idea of eating outdoors. Even if he did go out, he didn't get very far. The disease had made him so weak that he would get winded walking a couple of blocks. He couldn't trust his body anymore or any fast food brand's alleged integrity. Chris could lean on Kelly to get him through the difficult months. They understood that the convenience and speed of fast food came at the cost of cutting corners in the process. That process? The food supply chain. And cutting those corners nearly cost Chris Collins his life. It's shocking that to this day, we don't know which of these 21 ingredients caused the E. coli outbreak. But we know the truth. Chris Collins' contaminated chicken bowl is a symptom of a larger problem. The supply chain is to blame. Different parts of the chain don't communicate, so even if each part is monitored perfectly, which is highly unlikely, there is room for contamination between each step. That makes it impossible to trace an illness back to its source. We see it as a weakness, but is it possible that's how the fast food industry wants it to be? Chipotle sold Chris Collins a lie of food with integrity, and he went through hell for believing them. The most shocking part about all of this? Chris just got a small taste of Chipotle's supply chain nightmare. The bigger picture was so much scarier.
Health officials in Ohio are investigating hundreds of reports of illness linked to a Chipotle restaurant.
The CDC now investigating another outbreak of E. coli linked to Chipotle.
There are now 141 suspected cases of norovirus.
While the restaurant is back open tonight, the company tells us it was an isolated incident as they work to learn how those customers got sick in the first place.
Between 2015 and 2018, Chipotle had 8 disease outbreaks that affected 1,100 people. So many outbreaks for such a big brand is insane. And it wasn't just E. coli. There were outbreaks of norovirus and salmonella too. Their supply chain had huge weaknesses. They also had sick employees coming into work, contaminating the food sold to customers. The CDC fined Chipotle $25 million for letting this happen. It was the biggest food safety fine in history. That seems like a lot, but it's chump change to them. They made $4.86 billion in revenue in 2018. $25 million is nothing to the fast food brand. This fine is paid by a publicly traded company to the government, but a Chris Collins needs to take the company to court himself to see a single cent. It's a joke. But maybe we've made ourselves the joke. In a 2016 class action lawsuit, one of the victims demanded free burritos as part of her settlement agreement. So many victims who only got mildly sick went back to Chipotle as soon as they could.
As dozens of Chipotle stores throughout the Pacific Northwest are starting to open their doors again after a massive closure following that E. coli outbreak.
Odd settlements like that existed for one reason. No one died in these outbreaks. Customers can tell themselves, hey, I just got a little sick, that's no biggie. But that's not always the case. A much deadlier outbreak in 2003 makes the Chipotle incident seem like an innocent little mistake. The Chi-Chi name used to stand for good, wholesome, affordable Mexican food. But they had an outbreak so deadly, it cost people their lives. Some survivors had experiences so horrific, their lives were changed forever. Richard Miller didn't know that lunch at Chi-Chi's with his wife Linda would lead to a series of tragic events. By the end of October 2003, intense fatigue had left the husband and wife stuck in bed. Then came the body aches and jaundice. But after a few days, Linda got better. Her husband of over 3 decades did not. What was this illness and why was it so deadly? Unfortunately for Richard, his fight was just getting started. He had hepatitis A, as did Linda. The disease usually sorts itself out, like it did with his wife. So when doctors gave him IV fluids and sent him home, they figured that would be the end of it. But the doctors knew something Richard didn't. He was just one of hundreds of patients with hepatitis A. The doctors had an outbreak on their hands, and you wouldn't believe what happened next.
The sign on Chi-Chi's in Beaver County is clear. The restaurant is closed. Chi-Chi says it plans to reopen within the next 72 hours with the approval of health officials. If you ate at this Chi-Chi's anytime within the last 14 days, the health message is, see your doctor.
Unlike a lot of the other victims, Richard's health fell off a cliff. The disease took control of his body and mind. He was completely incoherent and so weak he couldn't stand. Linda feared the worst for her husband, and the worst came true. Richard had developed a rare complication called fulminant Hep A. It's as severe as it is rare. The virus had entered his liver, attacking the organ's healthy cells. It could also damage his brain before sending him into multiple organ failure. Fulminant hepatitis A had a fatality rate of about 3%, but that number skyrocketed in victims over 40. Richard Miller was in his late 50s. Doctors could only do so much, but if the virus was aggressive enough, no amount of medication or hoping for a miracle would save him. Richard's 3 children joined Linda by his hospital bed and saw a disease destroy the man they loved. Fulminant Hep A was ripping apart his brain's ability to function. It drove Richard to anger, and he even tried to rip out his IVs. Doctors had no choice but to sedate him. He was then intubated and hooked up to machines to help him breathe. For Linda, this was the biggest challenge of their 36-year marriage, and she grew convinced they would not get past it. Richard's children broke down seeing their father held together with tubes and machines. As his liver failed, the Miller family prayed for divine intervention. But in the back of their minds, they had the same question. Would a liver transplant be enough? On November 7th, a viable liver finally arrived. That was the easy part. Richard's age, combined with what the fulminant Hep A had done to him, meant that surgery was very risky. Even if he made it through the surgery, survival was not a guarantee. It was wishful thinking for the Miller family. Just days before, they had seen a successful transplant fail to control the disease. Almost every scenario saw Richard flatlining during surgery. And that's what happened. Richard's fragile heart caused a lot of trouble in a difficult 7-hour surgery. Luckily, he made it through the operation, but at what cost? He was paralyzed, sedated, and kept under cooling blankets to control his raging fever. Every minute lasted a lifetime for Linda and her children. They hoped and begged for Richard to return to them. But what would his new life look like if he did survive? The answer to that question would have to wait. Richard's recovery was slow. Really slow. A few days after the liver transplant, he opened his eyes and could follow basic commands. That was a promising start. But he was still extremely sick and was kept under by the doctors. Richard returned to the land of the living, but he was in hell. On November 16th, he saw the staples that closed the massive surgery incision. Every time he moved or coughed, he felt a stabbing pain shoot through his body. Luckily, the virus had not caused major brain damage. Over the next few weeks, Richard had to relearn how to live. His vocal cords were paralyzed and needed surgery. After that, he was in speech therapy and physiotherapy to learn how to speak, walk, and care for himself again. Linda had been the family's rock, recovering from her own Hep A while caring for her children. She would have to remain strong when Richard was discharged on December 2nd. Her husband was coming home, but with massive medical bills and a lifetime on anti-rejection meds. Richard survived, but he never became healthy again. He lost the mental sharpness he had before falling sick. Every meal was difficult as he struggled to chew and swallow. He had to deal with nerve pain in his arms and legs and couldn't help around the house. Richard believed he had become a burden to Linda, and that thought broke his heart. The rest of his life would be spent with routine hospitalizations. His transplant caused complications and made him vulnerable to a bunch of illnesses. On top of that, Richard also had to ensure his new liver stayed at 100%. From looking forward to what life had in store for him, Richard now spent all his time thinking about what could go wrong. One lunch had ruined his life, and it was time for Chi-Chi to pay. Unlike what would happen at Chipotle over a decade later, Chi-Chi's outbreak was traced to contaminated green onions from Mexico. About 9,000 people were potentially exposed to Hep A, out of which there were 650 confirmed cases. 485 people were hospitalized, and 4 victims passed away. A class action lawsuit with just under 5,000 people was settled for $800,000. Each victim received about $160 because they had to get immune globulin shots after eating at Chi-Chi. The Miller family didn't care if it was green onions or carrots. Chi-Chi was responsible. They took the brand to court and settled for $6.25 million. It wasn't a cakewalk. The family had to wait 2 years for that payout. Richard had to fight for his day in court while also fighting everything Chi-Chi had done to him. Compare this to what happened with Chipotle and the CDC. The government pulled up the fast food brand, and it had to cough up $25 million. But Miller had to defeat death, sickness, and trauma to fight for that $6.25 million. Chi-Chi's hepatitis A outbreak happened despite regulation and oversight. This just proves how broken the food supply chain is. People need to get sick or even die before any real action can be taken. It's a flawed system, but it is progress. That progress is because of a 6-year-old girl. We'll tell you about her and her role in the biggest, deadliest, and most horrific disease outbreak in U.S. history.
Hi, Stan. I'm Jack. Our kids are in Little League.
Well, I hope my humble hamburger meets with your approval. Of course, it's not as huge as your Bacon Ultimate Cheeseburger, with its 2 jumbo patties smothered with 3 slices of melted cheese and 8 pieces of crispy bacon. I'm just a hard-working mailman with store-bought buns.
I'll just have some beans.
Oh, sure. Mock my beans.
It may not seem like it today, but Jack in the Box is as important to American fast food as a Wendy's or McDonald's. It has been around since 1951. But how did one disease outbreak in 1992 and 93 change everything about the brand and American fast food? We'll show you how the perfect storm of negligence and weak oversight let this happen. In the eye of this storm stood 6-year-old Lauren Rudolph. On Christmas Eve 1992, the 6-year-old fell sick. She had a light fever and her stomach was giving her a lot of trouble, so her mother Ronnie didn't send her to school that day. Like Chris Collins 2 decades later, Ronnie assumed that Lauren had the flu. But like Collins, she quickly got sicker. Like Richard Miller, she lost most of her energy. Ronnie and her husband Dick rushed their daughter to the ER. Doctors assumed that she was having appendix issues. The disease she actually had wasn't even on the doctor's radar. Lauren was given painkillers to sleep through the night. Christmas Day wouldn't be milk and cookies, it would be a barium test. Back then, barium tests were used to get a better understanding of what was going on inside the body. It was needed because the doctors were stumped. While Lauren slept, her parents and her brother went home to wrap her Christmas presents. They hoped the gifts would cheer her up, maybe even make her feel better as doctors worked to diagnose her. But Lauren didn't have presents on her mind. At home, Ronnie found a note Lauren had written to Santa before she went to the hospital. Her only wish was to feel better for Christmas. Imagine wanting to give your 6-year-old child the world, but all she wants is to be free of pain. Pain the doctors would have no answers for. The next morning, Lauren had the strength to open only one present. She couldn't open the rest, so her brother read to her, hoping the barium test would have answers. It didn't. Lauren just kept getting weaker. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with her, and things would get much worse the next day. On December 26th, Lauren's heart gave way and other major organs began having issues too. Her parents could only watch. Her 11-year-old brother probably questioned why he couldn't protect his younger sister. A few hours later, Ronnie and Dick were asked to make a decision every parent fears. Should they keep Lauren hooked up to machines because they weren't ready to let her go? Or should they end their daughter's pain as a final act of mercy? A couple of days later, Lauren was laid to rest in a dress, the same dress she had unwrapped on Christmas Day. Lauren's family said goodbye to her, but they deserved answers. Before her burial, an autopsy conducted by Dr. Billman finally gave them some closure. Her medical notes had listed hemolytic uremic syndrome, or HUS, as a possible diagnosis. The state of Lauren's organs pointed in only one direction. A medical paper Dr. Billman had read a few days ago lined up exactly with what had happened to Lauren. That paper revealed Shiga toxin-producing E. coli as the main cause for HUS. Lauren's remaining samples from the lab confirmed what he had suspected. She had suffered from E. coli 0157H7. This was the Shiga toxin in Chris Collins' body in the 2015 Chipotle outbreak. The only difference? In 2015, people knew the threat of E. coli and the symptoms that came with it. This only became possible because of what happened to Lauren. As more cases came in, the outbreak was traced back to Jack in the Box. She became the face of a consumer movement to hold brands accountable and change food safety standards. Her tragic fate made people pay attention to the dangers of E. coli and how little the fast food industry cared about it. Lauren inspired people to fight and not ask for, but demand change. David Thino, a food safety expert, created most modern health and safety standards. He kept a picture of a little girl on his desk as he worked. That girl was Lauren Rudolph. She was a constant reminder of what was at stake. No other child should ever go through what she did. But that was after. During the outbreak, 10-year-old Brianne Kiner went through exactly what Lauren had. Her symptoms were just as severe as the 6-year-old girl's had been. Brianne's body was under huge stress for weeks, but somehow she got better. She was weaned off the machines. It took 5 years of rehab, but she survived. It was a miracle, a cosmic fluke that saved Brianne Kiner but failed Lauren Rudolph. Brianne was the sickest person ever to survive E. coli. 3 other children other than Lauren were not so lucky. They were 2-year-old Michael Knoll, 2-year-old Selena Shribs, and 17-month-old Riley Detweiler. Several other children, like Brianne, became seriously sick. Some of them were even left with chronic issues, and it was all because of one choice made by Jack in the Box. Their outbreak was traced to contaminated meat, the same meat that went into their hamburgers. Exactly the kind of hamburger we mentioned at the beginning of this video. In Seattle, they ignored the Washington state law of cooking meat to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Instead, they followed the federal law of cooking only to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Why? Well, it probably saved them a couple of minutes so they could sell more hamburgers. E. coli dies at 155 degrees Fahrenheit. If Jack in the Box had followed state law, Seattle-based Brianne Kiner would have never gotten sick. Jack in the Box could have just cooked the meat according to state law and it would have been safe. But that thought probably didn't even cross their minds. Why does a child have to get seriously sick or pass away before companies and agencies pay attention? It's not like E. coli was something new. Smaller outbreaks were happening as early as 1982. If they had paid attention, the bacteria would have been heavily researched. That research could have saved Lauren Rudolph's life, like it eventually did for Chris Collins. A 6-year-old girl with an entire life ahead of her became a martyr. She was only one of 732 confirmed cases. 178 victims of the outbreak were left with permanent injuries, including brain and kidney damage. 73 Jack in the Box locations were contaminated, and most of the victims were under the age of 10. Brianne got a settlement of $15.6 million for everything Jack in the Box did to her. Her lawyer also led a class action lawsuit that was settled for over $50 million. This was a massive payout that would be about $105 million in today's economy. E. coli was upgraded to a reportable disease at all state departments. This didn't exist before 1993. That's why the earlier outbreaks flew under the radar. Federal law was updated to ensure meat was cooked at 155 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the reason meat wasn't a factor in the Chi-Chi and Chipotle outbreaks. Lauren's fate ensured that no one else would suffer the way she did because of contaminated meat. She forced government agencies to create systems that protect all of us today. One of those systems was the Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, or HACCP, introduced by USDA in 1996. It's designed to ensure that food doesn't get contaminated and is safe for people. The Chipotle and Chi-Chi outbreak happened after HACCP was introduced. That should tell you all you need to know about how well this system is enforced. Chi-Chi's Hep A outbreak led to the FDA's 2020 ruling over requirements for additional traceability records of certain foods. It exists to prevent food contamination in the supply chain. In 2006, the CDC recommended that all children get the hepatitis A vaccine. These are just requirements. There's no enforcement. Why can't government agencies protect the Laurens and Briannes of the country? Why aren't there any proactive changes?
Officials now say 7 people have been killed by the outbreak of E. coli in Walkerton, Ontario.
Well, there's a disgusting reason they act only after an outbreak has happened. It's easier for major fast food brands to settle lawsuits or pay government fines than address the problems in their supply chain. If you read about the U.S. food supply chain, it's all about lost money. There's not much about disease outbreaks. There are no references to Chris Collins, Richard Miller, Lauren Rudolph, or their families. Money, money, money. That's all that matters. Why would the fast food industry pour hundreds of millions of dollars into fixing what's broken and then spend more to maintain it? It's more cost-effective to pay a fine and settle a lawsuit now and then. The industry sells you narratives about its new safety features. Brands want you to have faith in them again. They want you to believe the past won't repeat itself. But not much has actually changed. It's a slap in the face to every victim of a fast food disease outbreak. Those safety standards don't actually stop outbreaks. Settling a lawsuit with Lauren's parents won't bring their daughter back. Paying for Richard Miller's health problems won't help him stand up and do the dishes with his wife. And even for those payouts, the victims have to go to court and fight for themselves.
I still had the mask over my mouth for breathing. I said, "I love you, Mommy," and she knew I came back for her. And I love her.